Welcome, time for some art fun. Today we're going to do a review of this TRANSON Stay Wet palette that I've had for a little while now, so stick around. I've had this 16 well TRANSON plastic portable paint storage palette with the fuchsia details for several months now. I actually unboxed it for you all in one of my very first, actually the very first unboxing video, which you can enjoy. I'll link it below. And I was super impressed with it. It has this double locking system. In addition to that, on this cap, there's also a mixing palette, and there is this silicone layer that I have below this internal swatch card that I made for my palette. And these are the colors that I have in there. I'm actually going to make a new swatch card with you today because I've replaced a couple of colors since I first got it. This silicone layer gets embedded into the different wells, and that creates a seal on top of a seal. And I'm going to talk in this video about how really the only way you can mess this thing up is if you overfill it, which I did, as you can see here for this video. I was looking at this and thinking, oh, I have some that are almost used down to pretty low. I want to make sure that I fill these up better, because having it pretty well filled, although not overfilled, is one of the keys to making sure that these paints don't dry out. I have traditional gouache in this plastic palette. It is a very small palette. It's just about the size of my palm. It is less than an inch high, and it's about 4.5 by 3.5 as far as an almost perfect square. I have really loved using this, and as you all know, if you use gouache, like watercolor, it does re-wet. And this is me re-wetting one of the colors that I've had, the Cypress Green from Winsor & Newton, one of my favorite colors in this palette. But as you also know, if you use watercolor and traditional gouache, watercolor re-wets like a dream. It is meant to re-wet. It is very rare that you get a watercolor that is hard as a rock and requires a lot of effort to re-wet. But even in those circumstances, you put a dollop of water on it and you wait, 10 minutes, you rub the water around and it's pretty much ready to go. Most watercolors re-wet pretty well. Even the Prang $16 16 well watercolor, entry-level watercolor, that's my favorite cheap watercolor. Gouache, on the other hand, if you make a palette with gouache where you intend the gouache to dry up, it is not going to be as wonderful to use. It is not, you want that out of the tube consistency, that creamy wet consistency that you can actually see right here. This is what you want it to look like months and months in. Now, I've had this for months and months. Some of these colors, like that Naples yellow and the raw sienna there, are fine just with a little mist from that sprayer. I have this other mister that really does a fine mist over the whole thing. Sometimes a color or two will need to actually be mixed with a palette knife after being sprayed. That's really only a couple of the colors. We'll talk about that later. Sometimes I need to do an actual eyedropper of water. Now, when I went to put the silicone back in after topping these off, I realized I'd made a huge mistake, which I've never made with this palette before. In all the months that I've had it, I haven't had an issue with it once. But of course, coming in to make the stinking review video, I overfilled it, which I realized right about here, because I start to see stuff oozing out the sides, different gouache paint oozing out the sides, like this red, which was apparently super staining and on my hands for days, this Cypress Green, which is just one of my favorite colors, so I went a little too crazy refilling it. The Perylene Violet was overfull. A lot of these were overfull. So when I realized that it was all over my hands and I'd made a little bit of a mess and it was all over the cap and all over the bottom, and I was showing you here just how overfull it was, and maybe it wasn't fully seating, the silicone was not seating into the wells, I squished it closed anyway. I fought the resistance and pushed it closed. And as you can see on the side here, maybe you'll be able to see, maybe you won't, but it didn't fully close because it was over full. And what happened here, see how clean it is? I took about an hour to an hour and a half break to clean this whole thing. And in watering the outside, not realizing I'd really messed up the inside, color got everywhere. It got on my floor, got on my hands, got on my towels when I frantically reached for them. It's a total mess. I literally had to prepare my husband for the murder scene he was going to walk into in the bathroom, because that primary red was one of the colors that overflowed, and man, is it a staining red. It really did look like I had committed a crime and was trying to cover it up. So, especially with the guilt all over my face for ruining our towels. Can you imagine? So I will say this, don't overfill it. Fill it up, maybe halfway. Put the silicone cap back in. If there's a little bit of color on the rims, that's normal. But if it's gooey all over the place, you might have gone too far. Maybe spoon some of the paint back into the tubes with your palette knife. I wish I had done that instead of shoving it closed. And that's my first tip for this. You need to fill the wells because having enough paint in there to sort of play amongst itself, that's what keeps it wet. You can't be timid. You can't put a little dollop on the bottom and hope that does it. It will dry out. But if you fill it too much, such that the top doesn't actually close and create the seal, you're wasting your time with getting an airtight palette. It won't be airtight anymore. So it's that delicate balance, which, by the way, is pretty natural. It was pretty intuitive to me when I first got this, when I first filled it, and I did do a video here for you where I filled this for the first time and did a swatch card for the first time and did a test painting for the first time. It's the two little guinea pigs. I think it's called Tons of Gouache. I'll put a little picture here for you and I'll link it below. But that's the one where I did it right. So just follow what I did there because that worked for months and months. Now, I did not pick this up every week, far from it. In the very beginning, I would open it every week and spray it because I was so self-conscious based on what had happened to my Himi Maya gouache set. My Himi gouache set, which is about $18 when I got it, required so much effort to keep the paint alive. It was much bigger wells. There was a lot more paint. So it stayed alive a lot longer than you would think without any attention, just because, again, the amount of paint almost dictates how long it stays wet on its own, even without a perfect seal. But eventually it dried out. And once, especially something like the white dried out, it was just crumbles of rocks. There was no bringing it back to life. So now that we've done the swatch card and you see the new colors that I have, I'm going to do a test painting for you here. And this one is a bumblebee. I got a request from one of my longtime viewers to do a bumblebee, and I thought that was such a great idea. And I saw a wonderful reference picture that I knew I could sort of zhuzh up and would work great with my colors that I have in this palette. So enjoy this test painting while I talk you through the rest of my observations of this palette after having it for several months. After the first couple of weeks where I was really babying it and spraying it, which takes no time to just open it and spray it and close it. That's really all I was doing. It was staying perfectly wet. Every color was doing great. After a while, I wasn't opening it as much because if you watch my channel, you'll know that I'm on a self-challenge to use up several of my art materials. I've used up all of my flash paints. Next on my list is to use up all of my Turner acrylic gouache and my Regina's watercolors and my small Daniel Smith travel palette. Because I've been focusing on those materials, I haven't been picking this one up. And so I really did let it sit for a long time on end. I would really only pick it up and spray it anytime that it would be mentioned on my buddy Sketches and Scrubs channel. She is hilarious. She has an amazing haul where she bought literally 6 of these after seeing it on my channel, and it just became this like bug that our little group was bitten with, and a lot of people in our little friend group on YouTube got these. And so it became more and more rare that I would open it and spray it. So then I was getting a couple of comments over time of people who were watching that haul or watching videos since where I featured this little palette and asking me, hey, could you do an update? Could you do a real review of that? You just unboxed it. Can you review it? And so it was in my mind, oh, I've got to get around to doing a review of that. And then recently I got another comment that was like, hey, do a full review of this. And it just, for some reason, that most recent comment just put me over the edge. And I responded to that subscriber and said, you got it. It's coming this weekend. And so I just got down to it to do this. Of course, almost ruined this palette and now almost need to replace it, but we're gonna see based on overfilling and smushing it closed aggressively anyway, in spite of what the reality feedback was giving me. So don't do that. But yes, for the months and months that I've had this, let's talk full review. Number one, my first impression held up. My first impression, if you watched that video, was this is thick, strong plastic. I'm not worried about it, being dropped from, a little bit of a height. I don't think it's going to break. I haven't had any issues with it. The paint doesn't flop all over the place. The gouache does not fully dry out for most of the colors, even if you neglect it for months on end. And I'm talking months on end. So for these, it was very specific color to color. And I will give you the rundown of the colors that worked for me, but what I'm going to tell you is my overall takeaway. If you don't want to sit and baby this, maybe once a month, give the colors that have a tendency to dry a zhuzh in a swirl with a toothpick or with your palette knife like I did. then they might dry out. A couple of colors might dry out. And some colors will apparently never dry out, even if you put this in your closet and forget about it for a year. So I will give you a rundown now of which colors did what. And I'm going to invite anyone who watches this in the comments to let me know any additional colors you've tried in here so that anyone watching this video can get the benefit of the sort of hive mind, not to use a B term, but really to use a B term in the comments. So number one, just like with my Hemi gouache, the white was the first that wanted to dry up. However, the white in the Hemi gouache palette became unusable, unrevivable crumbles of just hard rock. This white I was able to revive because, as you see in this palette here in what I'm using, the white woke up and was usable. The cork yellow that I'm using a lot for the greenery in this painting, and the regular yellow that I'm using in this little greenery over here that you're seeing, that both of those wanted to dry. So the cork yellow from Holbein and the primary yellow from the primary set from Winsor & Newton, both of which I'm primarily using, along with the primary green, just to say primary again, all of which I'm using for the green item in this painting right over there. Those all three were paints that wanted to dry. All of the Winsor & Newton primary set were not loving this palette. Those stood out as not loving this palette, whereas all of the other Winsor & Newton colors that I bought were great in this palette. So giving you the rundown, Perylene Violet worked great from Winsor & Newton. The primary blue, Winsor & Newton, was okay. Didn't need a huge zhuzh, did not dry up and become hard, but wasn't as creamy and liquid as some of the other ones. The Cobalt Turquoise from Holbein worked well, just needed a spray and a little zhuzh once in a while, was not really wanting to get hard. Cypress Green worked beautifully from Winsor & Newton. Primary Green, meh, from Winsor & Newton. Olive Green from Winsor & Newton, literally like out of the tube after months of not even looking at it. Just, that was one of the colors that did amazing, as did the Elm Green from Holbein. Very similar colors. You don't necessarily need both. I love green. I needed both. Cork Yellow did poorly. That's from Holbein. Primary Yellow, meh, from Winsor & Newton. The Naples Yellow from Winsor & Newton, total liquid, just like it was out of the tube fresh. So that was amazing. Raw Sienna, same thing. Winsor & Newton, like it was fresh out of the tube, even after months of neglect. Burnt Umber from Holbein did well. The white needed to be zhuzhed and woken up the most, but still was totally revivable after months, whereas my Hemi Maya gouache was just dead and dust and gone, and I couldn't revive it. The black from Winsor & Newton was okay, needed a little bit of the eye drops instead of just the mist, but that was really all it needed. Quin Magenta from Winsor & Newton was great, and Primary Red was meh. So the primaries are the ones I really wouldn't think work great in here, but a lot of these other colors, especially if you were less white, although the Naples Yellow did great, so it's not really a hard and fast rule, but those are the ones that tended to do better. I will definitely continue to use this. I'm not in the need for looking for another solution. I was able to use this palette pretty quickly. If I hadn't freaking made my huge mistake, this would have been a matter of minutes to get this palette ready to make this painting, and all of this gouache felt like it was from a tube, brand new. I really do highly recommend this palette. I was very thrilled with it. The Amazon link and the Amazon description, my apologies, says that you can use this for acrylic. Heck no, I would not use this for acrylic. Hilariously, it says you can use it for gouache, acrylic, watercolor, or lipstick, etc. Can't speak to the lipstick. Definitely watercolor would work great in here. Definitely the gouache worked great in here. I was super excited about this, especially for the fact that it's under $13. It was about $15 when I got it, and then it was out of stock for a long time because it was so popular. So it's in stock. I've linked it below, at least at the time of this video, it's in stock. And I would definitely get this again. I would get this for more of my colors and just bring 2 of them because it's so small. I loved how this painting came out. This was a super fun process. I missed my paints. I missed these. I need to come up with a better solution to rotate some of my other paint, even though I'm trying to use these other materials up. So I kind of only want to use those materials. But I'm really glad that you watched this review. I hope it answered your questions about this palette. And if you liked the video, remember to leave a like. Check if you're subscribed. If you're not, I would so appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel. And until next time, remember, create something cute.